It began not with a robbery, nor a revolution, but with a whisper that power could be rewritten as law. When the banks collapsed and the nation starved, the people searched for thieves in alleys and vaults. But the real theft was already being drafted in marble offices. Quiet men with pens, convincing a broken public that salvation could be printed. They called it recovery, but it was resurrection by deception. The moment America learned that if you could not own the gold, you could own the rules that defined it. And so began the legal scam, a crime sanctified by signatures, a morality replaced by paperwork, and a nation reborn in faith, not wealth. The Great Depression had shattered trust in value itself. Families hoarded coins beneath floorboards. Banks shut their doors behind trembling clerks. Out of that chaos, Franklin D. Roosevelt offered a cure, one disguised in duty. In 1933, Executive Order 16102 demanded that citizens surrender their gold to the government in exchange for paper notes. It was declared patriotic, yet beneath the language of sacrifice hid the quietest confiscation in history. Gold, the ancient proof of labor and restraint, was now property of the state. A promise replaced possession. Theft became policy. The Federal Reserve, still young but already unassailable, took its throne as the issuer of faith. Its notes, once receipts for gold, were now receipts for belief. Each dollar born without substance, yet defended by law. The Constitution's vision of sound money dissolved under emergency decrees, and the courtroom merged with the mint. Where once stood moral arithmetic, there now stood legal arithmetic, authorized illusion. Every crisis became a reason for expansion. Every expansion, a justification for obedience. The people accepted paper as patriotism, mistaking compliance for security. Then came war, the perfect absolution for economic sin. Factories roared, debt soared, and the lie became the lifeblood of victory. By 1944, the illusion was exported globally. At Bretton Woods, the victors gathered to forge a new order, crowning the dollar as the world's anchor. No longer backed by gold, it was backed by American power, tanks, oil, and industry masked as credibility. The dollar became the altar at which nations prayed. To hold it was to belong to the system. To resist it was to risk ruin. What began as a domestic emergency evolved into global obedience. It was genius wrapped in grace. Every country now traded through the same paper artery, believing it led to stability, not servitude. Each note of debt became another's reserve. Each promised another's prison. The illusion was complete. Value became circular. Debt became destiny. And because it was legal, it was moral. The courtroom had replaced the conscience. Picture the scene. Mountains of confiscated gold glowing under furnace light, melting into streams that feed a printing press. A judge's gavel echoes like machinery. A flag ripples above marble pillars as paper leaves the mint like holy scripture. This was not theft, it was transformation, the conversion of sin into policy. From that fire rose a new empire, invisible, lawful, and adored. They did not steal with guns, they stole with grammar, with clauses, with the illusion of justice. And as the smoke cleared, the crowd cheered for their rescuers. The scam had a seal, the crime had a constitution, and the ripple that began with a single order in 1933 still moves through every dollar today, and the empire applauds. It did not happen with a single speech or signature. It happened in silence, through the quiet confidence of a system that had already convinced the world that legality was the same as truth. By the time the post-war glow faded, the dollar had become scripture, and those who questioned its divinity were branded heretics of progress. The empire no longer needed conquest to expand. It needed belief. Laws multiplied like vines, each one promising order while concealing obedience. What began as an emergency cure became a permanent condition, and as the presses turned, prosperity took the shape of illusion, paper, policy, and patience. The year 1971 drew the curtain back for a brief, blinding moment. Richard Nixon announced that America would no longer redeem its dollars for gold, severing the final link between money and meaning. It was called temporary, but permanence hides best behind that word. Overnight, every currency became a shadow of faith, floating on promises, tethered to nothing. The world gasped and then adjusted. Traders returned to their desks, markets opened as usual, and in that smooth continuation lay the brilliance of the deception. The scam survived because it caused no visible pain. When theft is silent, it feels like stability. Soon after came the pact that would immortalize the illusion, the petrodollar deal. America offered protection to oil-rich kingdoms. In return, oil would be sold only in US dollars. Energy itself was now chained to paper. Every nation that needed fuel first had to kneel at the altar of the dollar. The system had found its bloodstream. Inflation became invisible taxation. Debt became the export, and the law blessed it all. In the 1980s, deregulation dressed as innovation opened floodgates of speculation. Banks grew larger than the governments meant to supervise them. Politicians spoke of efficiency, investors of freedom. But what truly grew was immunity, the untouchable alliance between money and rulemaking. By the 1990s, lobbyists wrote legislation the way authors write fiction: creative, deliberate, profitable. Every crisis that followed, savingsandloan.com, housing, became another rehearsal in the theater of rescue. Losses were privatized when they suited ambition, socialized when they threatened collapse. Congress debated, cameras flashed, and somewhere in the noise the same outcome repeated. The guilty were bailed out, the public was billed. The scam no longer needed secrecy. It lived in daylight, wrapped in jargon. Words like stability, liquidity, and quantitative easing replaced plain terms like debt and devaluation. The language of theft evolved into the syntax of policy. Behind it all was an idea far older than economics: the belief that law defines morality. If something is written, it must be right. If it passes the vote, it must be virtuous. And so citizens obeyed statutes that chained them, defending a legality that hollowed their labor. The Republic of Laws had become an empire of loopholes. Those who controlled legislation controlled the ledger. Those who controlled the ledger controlled life. The printing press and the ballot box had merged into a single instrument of consent. Imagine the picture: a marble corridor deep within the Capitol, blue light washing over portraits of men who once believed in limits. A banker's hand slides a document across the polished table. His cufflink bears the seal of the very committee meant to restrain him. Outside, cameras capture smiles and handshakes. Inside, the wording changes by a single line, enough to move billions. A gavel falls, echoing like machinery. Somewhere, a printer hums. The cycle renews itself. By the turn of the millennium, the scam had become culture. Young analysts studied derivatives as priests once studied scripture, searching for hidden salvation in complex formulas. Professors preached efficiency. Students repeated it like prayer. Law schools taught the architecture of compliance, not justice. And the ordinary citizen, overwhelmed by the language of finance, withdrew into silence, trusting that someone, somewhere, must understand the design. They didn't. No one did. That was the point. When law became a scam, morality became optional. The empire no longer feared rebellion, it feared awakening. And so long as comfort remained, the chains stayed unseen. The courtroom defended the counterfeit, the Constitution protected the con, and the crowd applauded the ceremony. It did not end with Nixon. It did not end with Reagan. It did not end with the crash of 2008 or the pandemic of 2020. The scam endured because it evolved, changing costumes, languages, and technologies, yet always wearing the same crown: legality. What began as a printed illusion has become a digital religion. Its temples are no longer marble halls but glowing screens. Its priests are not lawmakers but coders and bankers who speak in algorithms. And the people, still desperate for stability, now bow before numbers that have no substance, only speed. The law remains intact, the faith unbroken, the illusion perfected. In 2008, the mask slipped for a moment. The financial system, swollen with its own inventions, collapsed under the weight of promises it could no longer keep. Banks that had gambled the world's savings were declared too big to fail. The government that once swore to protect the citizen instead protected the architecture of deceit. Trillions were created overnight, money born without memory, and poured back into the very hands that caused the collapse. It was the old ritual in modern dress: theft legalized, loss moralized, and the guilty rewarded in the name of stability. The same courtroom, the same pen, the same applause. The empire had learned that accountability was optional when collapse could be rebranded as reform. Then came the next chapter: invisible, quiet, surgical, the rise of the digital dollar. The central bank digital currency, marketed as efficiency, disguised as control. A currency without paper, without privacy, without escape. Every transaction traceable, every purchase recordable, every descent predictable. They called it modernization. It was domestication. The walls of the vault had become the walls of the network. The promise of convenience concealed the cost of obedience. And as the world moved to screens, the people began trading not just their labor, but their freedom, one tap at a time. What once required laws and police now requires only code. The old courthouse is gone. The new judge is an algorithm that never sleeps. Taxation is automated, inflation is digitized, and dissent is monitored in real time. The system that began with confiscated gold has reached its logical conclusion, the confiscation of choice. You no longer need to surrender your coins, you simply need to agree to the terms of service. The paper dollar was an illusion of value. The digital one is an illusion of control. Yet beneath this quiet perfection lies the same ideology, the worship of legality over morality, the belief that as long as something is permitted, it cannot be wrong, the faith that complexity equals progress, that control equals safety, and so humanity continues to obey the same pattern it once feared, power disguised as order, obedience disguised as freedom. The scam no longer needs deception, it lives through consent. Picture the modern cathedral, glass skyscrapers reflecting 1,000 screens, trading floors humming like choirs, data centers glowing like altars in the dark. On those servers rest the digital echoes of every life, every loan, every debt, every dream turned into code. Somewhere within that endless hum, a silent truth remains. The wealth of nations is still a promise written by the few and believed by the many. The scam never ended because no one ever stopped believing. It moved from gold to paper, from paper to screens, from scarcity to simulation. It learned to speak every new language of progress, and in doing so, it made itself eternal. It does not need to hide anymore, it needs only to be accepted, and we, the descendants of those who once surrendered their gold, now surrender our data, our privacy, and our silence. The cycle continues. The courtroom hums in the cloud, the mint glows blue, the ripple widens. If you found truth in this story, if you felt the weight of the illusion and the silence of its reach, then help the ripple grow. Like, share, and subscribe to Financial Ripples, where every episode uncovers the patterns behind power and the price of believing in them. Because history doesn't repeat, it compounds, and understanding it is the only wealth that cannot be confiscated.